I hope everyone can see me.
Yes.
Yes. So before I begin, I'd like to share my presentation on the screen so that people can see. And please let me know if you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we're still in slide mode, i.e. not in presentation mode, but we can see your,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right. So as you can see, I guess my presentation is the only presentation I'd get more than 15 minutes. I hope so. Um, anyways, let me begin.
Yeah, I guess we won't have a problem with that.
Yeah. So I'm using. Pardon me, I'm not fluent with the English language as much as I'd like to have a conversative paper. So I've had some notes. So permit me and pardon me if it seems like I'm reading off a list, but I think it laid my presentation. So the title of the topic that I wish to present is "Laughing Through Darkness," and it's an exploration of Jewish humor and existential dread in the infamous Philip Roth's Portnoy's complaint. So I just wish to give a brief introduction about what my paper is going to be, and then we'll proceed to individual topics within the paper. So in the introduction, I'd like to just introduce the author and all. So Philip Roth's novel Portnoy's Complaint is one of the most influential novels in the 20th century American literary canon, especially Jewish American literature. And it is outrageously hilarious, and it continues to stir controversy and provoke spirited debates, even to this date. It is part of many Jewish literature courses in my country, and it is read widely in many places. And what makes it interesting is the novel sort of is an exploration about the condition of a Jewish person in 1960s America who is there is a brilliant employment of a frame narrative wherein Portnoy, the central character, is in therapy sessions with a mostly silent counselor, and that provides the central character a platform for confronting societal taboos head on. Um, and there is a lot of relentless self mockery that happens, and there is a lot of sarcasm, and um, essentially he uses comedy as a tool to address his anxieties, and there is a sense of boldness and audacity of the novel as well. Now, before we try to understand Portnoy's complaint and where it comes from, the part of the theoretical framework of my paper works on incongruity of humor. And before I go into incongruity theory of humor, I'd like to just give a brief history of humor in general, how it is perceived. So humor has been the staple since ever since literature ever started, and we had like Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato mostly rejecting humor and calling it a degenerative art because people are making fun of people, which is sort of seen as disrespectful. And there has been many different theories like relief theory, saying that humor sort of helps people relieve from their stress. And over the years, how humor is perceived has been changing over the decades. But what especially makes the incongruity theory of humor the subject of my paper is it started in the 18th century, and it is a significant departure from the previously dominant superiority theory, which came all the way back from Plato and Aristotle. While the superiority theory attributed humor to feelings of superiority and relief theory emphasized the relief of nervous energy, the incongruity theory posited that humor arises from the perception of incongruity, a phenomenon that defies our mental patterns and expectations. And this perspective was championed by many thinkers like James Beatty, Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Soren Kierkegaard. And eventually, it is one of the most prevailing theories of humor in the realms of philosophy and psychological studies across the world. And um, among these people, among all the thinkers, my central focus is on Arthur Schopenhauer, who added a unique dimension to incongruity theory. He said that humor arises from incongruity between sensory perceptions of objects and our abstract rational knowledge of these objects. So, this incongruity becomes apparent when we group diverse things under a single concept, even though they possess distinct properties. For example, um, categorizing both a pug and a Saint Bernard as dogs creates an incongruity when we compare their actual size and characters. So, in order to better explain how this theory works, or how humor is seen in terms of incongruity theory, putting to our perception of reality and the actual reality into context, I'd like to give a few examples of certain scenarios where we can find incongruous humor. For example, let us say your friend welcomes you to their home for the first time, and he before he walks in, all his family members are sitting there, and before he opens the door, he says, "Let me introduce you to your furry friend," and he opens, and instead of a cat or a dog, they find you who has a beard. So here there are two pieces of senses knowledge: a dog and a bearded person who is invited into the house. And the line that is relevant to each other, but typically when we say let me introduce you to my furry little friend, people think we are referring to the dog, but where the humor arises is it rationally applies to the person as well. One more similar thing would be, let us say you're drinking with a bunch of friends and one seems very angry. They can say, do you want to cool down, giving them a drink, and they agree, but instead of giving them the drink to drink, you pour it on top of them, and that is sort of an incongruous thing. And one typically incongruous humor that I observed in real life is, I had a friend in my kindergarten, not in kindergarten, in my primary school, who used to buy heart a lot for his examinations. And we had textbooks with text in them, but the school teacher didn't give notes to the answers. So at the end of each and every lesson of sorts, we had questions and we had to write down answers and by heart them and write in the exam. So the teacher was clever. So the teacher said, for question 3, go to page number 52, you will find the answer in page number 52. So this guy, who's my friend, he wrote down in the notebook the answer as page number 52, and he wrote in the exam as well, he wrote the answer page number 52. So those are some of the examples of incongruous humor. And here this incongruous humor is very close to Jewish humor in general. So Jewish humor has been one of the defining aspects of Jewish culture for centuries. However, if you look at Jewish literature from the medieval period, it is only in the modern age that we find there is a lot of emphasis on humor in Jewish literature. And that comes because of the centuries of oppression which reached its peak point in the 19th century because of the Holocaust and overall persecutions and anti-Semitism in the entire world against Jews. Jewish humor sort of served as a survival mechanism for all the immigrants who came into the US especially, and their descendants, and it allowed them to cope with the hardships of immigrant life, discrimination and anti-Semitism. And one of the ways they did Jewish humor is they poked fun among themselves and at their own culture and their predicaments. And Jewish writers and comedians, especially Philip Roth in this study, found a way to reclaim power over the narrative and shield themselves from the harsh realities of their existence through humor. And humor in this context is sort of a resistance, and it is a means of asserting the identity of the Jewish writers while simultaneously integrating themselves into American society. And some of the key elements of Jewish humor, these are widely known, are there is a tendency to exploit psychic distance between the chosen status and physical reality. So Jews were considered the chosen people, but in actuality they're no longer considered the chosen people, and the physical reality is completely different. And this is where I personally found the connect to incongruous theory of humor and Jewish humor. Is there is a psychic distance, just like the object and the realm of an object in incongruity theory. And also Jewish humor has a self-depreciating quality that sort of helps them to navigate anti-Semitic values, as it co-opts their hatred and sort of changes the narrative a bit. And there is also a sense of the carnivalesque, where there is irrelevance towards authority figures. Especially Roth does this, where his writings are, even though he is Jewish, he's very critical of what Jewish people, and sometimes he earns the ire of Jewish people through his writings. And that is essentially my introduction to Jewish humor. And before I get on to how Portnoy's complaint sort of changed the landscape in terms of Jewish humor, I'd like to just make a small, paint a small picture of how America was in the late 1960s. As you can see, there's a picture of the moon landing. So, we begin at a juncture of affairs where the Cold War was at its peak, and with the news of Sputnik 1 spreading across the sky and growing a sense of panic in every citizen, the American landscape in the 1960s was a turbulent period. And it was now a given fact that the Russians were considerably more advanced in the frontier of war because they had space technology. And the news sprinkled a sudden spur of investments into science and technology, especially President Kennedy, in a sense of urgency and seriousness in his voice, he proclaimed that he would be able to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade when he took charge, and he was able to do that. And that was precisely the year when Portnoy's complaint was published. And apart from the Cold War and the public political sway towards developing science and technology, there were a number of movements that were happening in parallel, like the counterculture movement, the Beat generation, and then also there is a cascade of bold novels that have been hitting the American shores from the European continent, like Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. Or even within the country, there are novels like The Catcher in the Rye, which released 20 years ago in 1959, which sort of paved the way for the unfiltered portrayal of sexuality and rebellion, which Portnoy's complaint does a lot. And there are a lot of pictures, novels that have sort of dealt with the after effects of war and atrocities, like Slaughterhouse 5 or Catch 22 or One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And also there is a surge in rise in the feminist movement, with groundbreaking novels from Margaret Atwood's like Edible Woman and Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. And if we try to generalize the recurring theme of novels that have been published all around in the 60s, in the mainstream American canon, it could be said that these were, in a single word, revolutionary. And they challenged the traditional norms and were unapologetically explicit and dealt with taboo themes. And perhaps more than any novel written in the 60s, this sort of coarse, sexually explicit nature best exemplifies itself in Philip Roth's Portnoy's complaint. And this is the text, Portnoy's complaint, and this is the writer, Philip Roth. Now, initially, when Philip Roth's Portnoy's complaint released, much like almost Roth's other works, it was considered, it had a mixed reception, but mostly there was a lot of praise. That praise has reached such heights that Roth was even proclaimed to be the new voice of Jewish leaders. He was part of the trio of Bernard Malamud and Saul Bellow, but this 20-year-old younger writer is now considered the new voice of the Jewish people in America, especially in Jewish American literature. And at the same time, there were a certain amount of reviews. If we look at the reviews, we understand how the novel is perceived. Of course, it is a breakout hit. It has been widely read and it is part of curriculums of many colleges right now. But if you look at the initial reviews, we get a gist of how the novel is initially perceived. And in Sanford Pinsker, for example, in in his introduction to the critical essays of Philip Roth, in after almost like 13 years after the novel has been published, he said Portnoy's complaint changed everything, including the older charges about misogyny. Now Roth was, if anything, even worse, an ungrateful son and a mother baiter. So it was a very negative review. But the point is, most of the times, Roth's critics had a problem with Roth. They always wanted, they saw something that could be better. And there was a back and forth with Roth, especially with the New York Times, where Roth addressed New York Times. And Roth was also a very vocal writer, so there was a lot of comments both from Roth's side and from the reviewers on how Roth is perceived as a writer, and subsequently the reviews for each and every novel had a sort of a negative tinge to it as well. And if you look at sort of the novel itself, people consider it to be very entertaining, especially if you look at the review of Theodore Stoletov in his book Philip Roth, A Personal View. He says, if the book is a marvelously entertaining book, and one that mines an arrow but central vein more deeply than it has ever done before. You don't have to be Jewish to be vastly amused and touched by and instructed by Portnoy's complaint, though it helps. Also, you don't have to know Philip Roth to appreciate the personal triumph it represents, though that helps too. And here we get into another different point that sort of permeates in my doctoral thesis, which is how these writers, especially Philip Roth, earns a readership beyond the Jewish base. He's read by other immigrant people in the US, and that might be the topic of discussion for another presentation. But there is this idea that the Jewish voice slowly started to assimilate itself into the American voice over the 20th century, over the span, and from there is a change of Jews in America from what can be considered an immigrant population to one who is at the center of American society right now. So these are the initial reviews, and especially the Times, as I told, there is a connection with Roth and Times that has been ongoing till his last publication. And in the Times literary supplement, the reviewers say, what is Portnoy's complaint? A creedy cour from Jewish adolescents, a load of specifically Jewish guilt, a casebook of the Jewish blues. It is the most zany, zestful novel Philip Roth has written, and with all its seeming non sequiturs, a classic comic statement on the Jewish condition. So, there is no exaggeration to call this novel right now a classic in Jewish American literature, and it stands the test of time. And there is a renewed interest in the novel with brand new perspectives and relevance even after 50 years of its publication. And Alex Portnoy, the central character, he remains, as he did in 1969, extremely interesting, yet polarizing. He is a polarizing take on the uncertainty and ambiguity of identity in the American Jew. And now we come to the central point of the paper. So the paper puts the idea of Arthur Schopenhauer's incongruity of theory onto Philip Roth's Portnoy's complaint. And Roth's novel is steeped in Jewish humor, and it is a tradition known for its self-depreciation, ironic, and often absurd elements. This style of humor thrives on incongruity, and Roth masterfully incorporates into the narrative. One notable scene exemplifying Jewish humor is how Portnoy sort of, the entire novel is a recounting of his events to his supposed therapist. So he starts talking about how his experience with a non-Jewish woman, he calls them Shishka, as most people call, and he sort of goes to a woman's house for a dinner. She's a non-Jewish woman, and we see Portnoy to be torn between his sexual desires and his mother's expectations of him marrying a Jew. So as he navigates the evening, The incongruity between his lustful thoughts, which is his perceived reality, to the rigid societal norms which he is actually in, creates a comedic tension. And humor arises from this absurdity of this sort of predicament. And this is one of the themes that maybe Arden Schopenhauer would appreciate, because it employs the incongruity theory. And furthermore, if you look at his interactions, Portnoy's interactions with his parents, especially his mother, who is very overbearing, it is laden with incongruousness. Portnoy's mother embodies the stereotypical Jewish mother constantly meddling in his life, which is very close to Indian mothers also. We find a lot of similarities between the Orthodox Jewish lives and the Orthodox South Indian lives. And they expect him to conform to traditional values. The incongruity lies in Portnoy's efforts to break free from these expectations, while simultaneously feeling guilt and a sense of duty towards his family. He is struggling, of course, that is why he complains. And we also see that the title itself, it says Portnoy's complaint. And if we look at Jewish humor, it essentially is about Jewish people complaining about things. And incongruity also sort of works on this in different levels. And we see the humor is extracted from this incongruous nature of the family dynamics within his family. And one of the things, if there is any discussion about Portnoy's complaint, it should be incomplete without addressing Portnoy's sexuality and sexual escapades that happen in the novel. And there is a relentless sexual energy within Portnoy that sort of shows. And Portnoy's desire for sexual liberation clashes with his guilt-ridden conscience, leading to absurd and incongruous situations. And there are a lot of vivid descriptions about Portnoy's sexual encounters, which are often difficult to read. They border on the grotesque, and there is a stark contrast between the societal norms in which he lives and his carnal desires. The very infamous example that most people bring up is a scene where Portnoy engages in a sexual act with a piece of liver which his mother brings. And we look at that extremely disturbing sequence. We find the sort of difference in which we see how a liver can be perceived as a sexual object by Portnoy. And there is a sense of absurdity. There is the humor arises from the sheer incongruity of the situation, and there is a violation of established taboos which is seen in Jewish humor. And the absurdity of the act itself underscores the humor in the novel. That is how the novel operates. Schopenhauer's theory would find resonance in the way Roth employs incongruity to depict the clash between primal desires and rational judgment. And if we take the entire novel as a complaint itself, it works on several levels. It's a dark novel, it comes from a dark place, but on several levels, it works as a series of jokes, one piled over the other. And to conclude my paper, of course, there's a lot more to be researched, lot more close reading to be done in particular sequences, and to understand how the comedy operates. To conclude, I'd say Philip Roth's Portnoy's complaint serves as a compelling case study of how Jewish humor, rooted in incongruity, can be harnessed to explore the complexities of identity, of desire, and societal expectations. Roth's narrative brilliantly aligns with Arthur Schopenhauer's incongruity theory of humor by highlighting the absurd and incongruous aspects of Alexander Portnoy, the titular character's life. Through specific scenes and instances in the novel, we witness the power of incongruity to generate laughter, uh, while shedding light on universal human experience of navigating conflicting desires and societal norms. Roth's ability to blend humor and profound introspection, which is the central theme of the novel, makes Portnoy's complaint not only a hilarious read, but also a thought-provoking exploration of the human condition at the same time. So that is my paper. I'm open for questions, and I thank the people, the chair, and the people who are running the conference for providing me this opportunity.
Thank you, Usha. Our second speaker actually turned up during your talk, so we will have a second talk prior to the Q&A. So thanks for your investigation of in particular Jewish humor in Plural's novel, as you were saying. And our second speaker now is Vaishali Sharma, who was scheduled actually to speak yesterday, but she had issues because
I lived it. Okay, and the entire world was young in some ways. I mean, because of in the United States now. Since we're talking about the U.S. context, we had the baby boomer generation. We had this huge number of young people all getting, through adolescence at about the same time and into young adulthood. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on that in terms of Portnoy complaints popularity, but also its humor. Almost anything about older people was funny. I mean, I thought my dad was hilarious. I mean, and we all, almost any of the comedy programs would have older people, and we just laugh at them because that was the past, and this was, and the future was us. We're the baby boomers and all that. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on this notion of the situatedness of Portnoy's complaint having the baby boomer generation to reflect on. Now, I know that Portnoy was a little older than Portnoy himself. I'm blanking, 25, 30 type of thing. Maybe a little older of the baby boomer life, but maybe you could reflect on that. Thanks so much. It was both fantastic presentations. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, ma'am. So one of the things that I sort of understand from looking at a wider view of American history in general is, once the World War was over, there was a period of this was a period where the generation was coming out of the war. We had the angry young men generation who were sort of facing the after effects of the World War. Even if America did not completely participate and destroy itself in the World War, there was a lot of after effects of that. And this was a turbulent time, and whenever we look at turbulent times, especially like in history, like Renaissance or something, we sort of get a generation that's sort of highly impactful. We get people who do a lot of achievements. They cannot be born anytime else. I would say that these sort of turbulent periods of lots of things happening at the same time creates these magnanimous individuals who are sort of capable of a lot of things. And that's why we look at the art or the science and technology that came from that period. It is phenomenal. And in terms of humor, I think humor has always been one of the tools, as incongruity theory says, it is one of the tools of resistance. Humor is a tool where people use humor to sort of understand things that cannot be understood. For example, the Holocaust or all the massacres that were happening across the 20th century, especially the My Lai massacre in Vietnam that happened around this period. These cannot be understood in normal terms. And to cope up with these things, also we had a revolution in comedy itself. Like great comedians like George Carlin was sort of coming from this period of time, experiencing this after war, sort of looking at America from this point of perspective. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of your query?
Well, just on the impact of the baby boomers as forces for humor. As young people. Today we're old people. But forces for humor, having older people, because of their faults, because of the things we could see so clearly. For example, getting us into the Vietnam War and all of that. That they were funny in some respects. They were laughable. We could mock them. I mean, to that point, we could mock them. And the songs of the era, Neil Young's "Old Man," your old man, I can't, it's kind of a mean thing to say, and I feel badly about the way I thought about older people at the time. But I was just wondering how that wrapped into Portnoy's complaint, because as you say, the mothers were viewed in a way that was laughable. It might have had some affection to it, but it was laughable. And of course, some of the older individuals that set up things for Portnoy in distressing ways.
One of the things that I believe led to Portnoy's complaint was Roth himself, in a sense, because if you look at the very first novel Roth has written, right from Roth's inception, he was heralded as this new Jewish voice. In fact, Saul Bellow said that when there was some sort of flashback, people were protesting his first novel, Saul Bellow said, don't give a ear to your critics and just continue to do what you're doing. So we see Roth placed at a pedestal ever since he began writing. So in a ways, over the years, whatever he was trying to do, it is being received with good hands. All his books, historically were bestsellers, and they stayed in bookstalls for years. So there is a sort of free reign for Philip Roth to express himself, and that we see reach a much more deeper point in terms of sexuality when we go to Sabbath's Theatre down the line. So, and it also comes in a period where Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita reached American shores, and it was such a huge impact because of the rapid sexuality that was shown. So we are in this era of openness where thoughts about everything are changing, and one of the things that makes old people funny in a sense is the rapid way in which the world has transformed over those years, and it is happening even now. Like nobody could have imagined in the 1940s that we'd be able to place people in the moon by 60s itself, and nobody in the 70s could imagine that we could store thousands and millions of pictures in our pockets. So world has been rapidly changing, and the influx of that sort of a turbulent literature, but at the same time, we are that is a very interesting period of time, because while the same country, while it is able to put a man on the moon, it is not able to control its army, and it is sort of indulging in wars and letting its people die. So the very age can be seen to be humorous in a way. So I think it's a product of the zeitgeist. It is a product of the Portnoy's novels himself, how he sort of transformed himself into a writer that sort of speaks whatever he wishes to speak, and it's being celebrated. And it also is sort of a reflection of the sexual liberation that is happening, where the feminist movement is coming around. So that's how I think it works.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you for the great talk.
I guess I have a brief, or maybe not so brief, because I guess this could go pretty much anywhere, follow-up question to Usha regarding Jewish humor, but more so the part about existentialist dread, which didn't actually talk too much about.
The paper is in the progress, so I was not reaching that point yet.
So I was wondering, in a certain way, I guess I'm sort of feeling that if you look at Jewish American lit in particular, or also some Jewish American films, it seems like this sort of existentialist theme runs very deep in a Jewish, I don't know whether it's, I guess, even Jewish psyche per se, not even Jewish American psyche. And you made a great point about the incongruity.
I have difficulties with the word as well.
Yeah, being sort of a key element of Jewish American identity, or writing and identity. So would you say that this sort of existentialist thread in a certain way is also key to Jewish American culture at large, or Jewish American lit? Is this a recurring theme, or is this particular to Portnoy's complaint? Is there a twist maybe in Portnoy's complaint to this entire topic?
This existential dread is as American as it is Jewish. I could say that. Like, we come from the existential idea that originated in the US, from Emerson and Thoreau, and it is a running idea of like midlife crisis and all of these things have been in American culture over the years, especially in the 20th century. And if you look at Jewish people, um, thousands of years of their existence, they have been called the chosen people, but they have been persecuted every single place they went. And now the Jewish people, when they had these mass migrations in the beginning of the 20th century, when they moved like in millions and left their fathers behind, they had an identity crisis of sorts. Are they Jewish? Are they American? And this influx between their Jewishness and their Americanness is almost the central theme of all Jewish novels that have been popular, especially by the trio. Malamud writes in The Assistant how what it means to be a Jew from a different perspective, while Bellow writes about Jewishness, and all the writers like Singer or Malamud or Bellow have their unique perceptions, but if we try to generalize them, it is understanding what is this new hybrid culture. They come from the Yiddish culture, they've been speaking the Yiddish language for thousands of years, but now their new language is English. We have a generation of Jews after after thousands of years, where they don't know Yiddish. We have one generation of Jews where they are American first and Jewish next. And for the first time, there might be instances, very minute instances in history, especially like the Parsi community in India. But the Jewish community trying to assimilate itself and trying to find a hybrid culture is it is a rare phenomenon. So while these novels are being written at this particular point of time, especially in the later part of the 20th century, this identity crisis mixed with the general resentment in public after the world wars is one theme that sort of comes from all corners of life. It comes from the zeitgeist, the point of people, Jack Kerouac's like the Beat Generation. It comes from a Jewish sensibility and the current condition of Jews in that particular period of time, and it is also an American thing, if I could say that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, one more question.
Just another quick question about humor. Your presentation, the beginnings of your presentation were just brilliant. I mean, you took on the most difficult topic possible. What is humor? And you had a tremendous analysis. And I'm just wanting to add a little bit, or maybe just quiz you. Maybe I missed it. There's a type of humor that has to do with puns. Okay, plays on language and all of that. And I'm just wondering, again, with the types of media we're using and the things we're doing, people aren't buried in a novel as much as they would be in the past, and maybe can appreciate a pun or appreciate some type of a verbal play as much as they would otherwise. I'm just wondering where you see that going. The last time I read Portnoy was 3 decades ago. I'm sorry, 4 decades probably. So if you could, did puns, again, you brought up Yiddish, a number of the jokes that comprise this reservoir of Jewish humor are puns related to the Yiddish language and all that. I'm just wondering if you could reflect on that as a source of humor. But again, your presentation on what is humor was brilliant.
Thank you for that. What I think essentially comes in terms of like the incongruity theory of humor or the history of humor, and where we find a sense of disconnect with Yiddish humor translating itself into English humor is, if you look at history as a whole, reiterating my point, we find that Jewish humor was not rooted much in its medieval period. It is, I think, Heinrich Heimer, who is a Yiddish poet in Germany in the 1930s, who sort of, I think we find it in Dr. Wilson's lectures. Heinrich Heimer started the sort of Jewish humor trend that we see in the 20th century. And most of his humor is not properly translated into English because this is a sort of puns is a highbrow humor. It is based in language. You need to know the cultural connotation, you need to know the inflection of language, and there are a lot of factors in order to properly understand humor. And even, for example, Portnoy's complaint, if I read it for Portnoy's complaint for the first time, it is very different from after I did my research, when I read it for my research. Because if you don't understand what is happening in America at that particular period of time, if you don't understand what it means to be a Jew and all of these things, there are a lot of jokes that fly by.
Yeah.
So, for example, I don't recall the name, but there is one particular Jewish novel that has a character whose comedy is based on the idea of him misquoting the Jewish original texts. And if you don't read the text, if you're not
Yeah.
thorough with the central text, most of it would fly past you. And I've read reviews where people thought at beginning that he was quoting the text itself. So that is one thing. And humor historically has been seen as something that is degenerative, especially in orthodox times. And I believe that it is evolution, human evolution in general, that sort of made humor a thing, where humor is sort of this intellectual exercise, I believe. I mean, this is not according to my research, but this is my understanding of humor. I believe that humor is this acquired taste, this intellectual exercise that requires a sense of intelligence, but at the same time, it requires a sense of humanity to be able to look back and laugh at yourself. And when I see any race or any set of people embrace humor, I see it as them evoluting into a much better species in general.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you to the two presenters for your presentations, and thanks to Joanne for the question, of course, as well. Yeah, I guess we can conclude this session. Just as a quick announcement, our first keynote will start in 20 minutes, so I hope to see all of you there. Thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, ma'am, for your excellent questions. It sort of made me think a lot.
Thank you, everyone, giving us this opportunity, for listening so patiently, and also for accommodating me in this session.
No worries.
And Usha, I really enjoyed listening to your paper.
Yes,
Such
I
a
feel the same, ma'am.
well theorized paper. Congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am. Same to you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.